Hello and welcome to episode number 18 of my week at the club. This is Roger Capello, bringing you the action from the Wachusett Chess Club in Fitchburg, Mass, which happens every week on Wednesday nights. And last week I played a fellow named Ralph McNeilage, who you can see in the upper right, playing the black pieces against me. And he played a very good game. In fact, he won. I won't leave you in suspense. It's always a little harder to analyze your losses because it's not only painful, but sometimes you don't even understand what you did wrong. But I'll see if I can do an okay job at doing it for you. So this was a D-pawn opening that I played. So pawn to D4, knight F6, C4, E6. And I played knight F3. The reason for that is to avoid the Nimzo-Indian defense. Right, if I play instead knight to C3, black can continue on with bishop to B4. And as I've said in previous videos that I put out, it's a perfectly playable opening for white, but it's not one that I was really prepared or ready to play. So instead I avoided that. And after he played E6, I played simply knight F3, which is a way of avoiding the strict Nimzo-Indian, unless you transpose into it. But it does restrict white's options in a couple of other ways. In particular, now that I've played my knight to F3, this square on F2 is blocked, and I don't have the option of playing the pawn to F3 and pawn to E4 without moving my knight somewhere else first. So, you know, that's the kind of sideline variation that may no longer be possible. Okay, after knight F3, he continued B6, which makes it in the territory of a Queen's Indian defense, planning to fianchetto the bishop either on B7 as a possibility, or to play it all the way to A6 and to put pressure along that diagonal. I decided to counter with a fianchetto of my own. He developed his bishop to B7. I fianchettoed my bishop at G2. And then he played bishop B4 check. And I had a decision. Did I want to block with the knight on D2 or with the bishop on D2? They're both playable. I got a little greedy. I didn't want to... I wanted to try to win the bishop pair in the opening if I could. So I didn't really want to exchange my dark squared bishop, and instead I blocked with the knight. Of course, it steps into a pin, but not a very strong one, because it's easily gotten out of with castling. And after black castled, white castled too, and now that knight is free to move, although he may choose to exchange it off at some point. Play continued on with Ralph playing D5, and I should remark now and later that Ralph played a really good game. He's rated provisionally, I guess, 1663 it says, because he's only played about 20 games, rated games, but he seems to be quite a strong up-and-coming player, and I knew that because he had beaten Jeff Lepore last week, and so I took him seriously, but he played virtually all good moves in this game. I didn't see anything that I would point to that I would try to improve upon in his play. So after D5, I played knight E5. That's one possibility. Also, I could kick the bishop right away with A3 is another idea. But my idea here is that I wanted to get an aggressive knight on E5, and also it gives me more support on the C4 square where that pawn is under attack. That's basically it. And the idea, of course, is now to potentially bring my other knight to F3 to support the knight on E5. So Ralph counterattacked immediately in the center with C5, which is a very energetic and good move. It's the computer's first choice. In fact, in this game, a lot of the moves, at least in the first 15 moves, are the first choice of Stockfish. And we don't want a new version of Java right now, thank you. We'll click that away. And so I continued with a3 to basically to force his bishop either to exchange or to go to a5. I felt if he went, sorry for going backward there, if he goes to a5 here, that I would be threatening after rook b1 to push my b pawn and trap the bishop. So that's really not a great square for the bishop to go to. I could also exchange it off by playing knight to b3 as another idea to attack that bishop on a5. So instead, he goes ahead and trades it off immediately. And I looked in my database, and now we're down to the point where there are only 2 games that are played in this particular position. And in both of these, the continuation after I took back the pawn was not a pawn exchange, but instead it was knight e4. Okay, and both of those games ended up in draws. Instead, what Ralph did actually, playing c takes d4, is the computer's first choice. And as I said in my notes there to the game on the side, it actually ended up that we followed the computer's preference for the main line all the way up to Black's 14th move. So it was a fairly accurate game, at least up to that point. I attacked his rook with my bishop, and this was, of course, was planned before I went into this variation. After he moves the rook, then my queen can come and attack the pawn. So basically, that there was no way for him to save this pawn that's on d4 at this point without giving up other material. So after I took with the queen, I was feeling pretty good at this point because I had a clear lead in development. My rooks are connected. He still has 2 pieces between his rooks. Of course, it's Black's move, so you really have one of those. You know, he could play queen c7 or something, and then he only has the knight to get out of the way. But still, it's a lead in development. A somewhat space is, I suppose, arguable at this point because he does have center pawns. He has the pawn on d5, which is quite a strong pawn. And his pawn on e6 at least attacks the d5 square. So he really has better center control than I do. The only center control I really am exerting is with my pawn on c4 and, of course, with my fianchettoed bishop. But as far as pawns go, my central control is not as good as his. But I was happy with my position. On the computer at this point, I think, well, let's just take a quick peek. I think it's about a half a pawn or so, or maybe 3/10 of a pawn advantage for white. Well, not so much, okay. It's only about 1 or 2/10 of a pawn. So it's pretty marginal advantage to white at this point. He played knight c6 to basically to continue on with this development and to do something about my aggressively posted pieces in the center. And I can't really avoid trading it because if I move my queen, he has his choice of taking my knight or bishop. And so I trade it, and he takes back the bishop. Okay, and let me scroll down a little bit here. Okay, so after he does that, I then play rook f to d1, centralizing my rook. I figured my 2 rooks belonged on the c and d files in this position where the activity is taking place between the pawns, and I think that's a correct evaluation. He played queen c7. That was, I believe, let's step back here and look at the computer. I think this is the first point where the computer was suggesting something different. Either rook c8 or bishop a4 are the lines that it wants to look at. Although queen c7 costs him only a couple of tenths of a pawn in terms of the computer evaluation, so it's really not much. I traded c takes d5, and he took back with his knight. And I immediately, well, actually I didn't immediately. First I attacked his queen through the bishop, pinning the bishop. And he continued on with a strong move, queen to b7. And now he's threatening to exert serious influence along this diagonal, attacking my bishop here with if there's a discovery by the knight. Of course, right now you can't really do that because there's no check or anything, and if he moves the knight, I could play bishop takes bishop, Zwischenzug, and that wouldn't be good for him. Well, actually, it would be good. Let's say white does an absolute nothing of a move like h3. Then black, for example, is threatening to play knight takes bishop, and now if I were to take back the knight, then my bishop would be lost. And if instead I took the bishop, this so-called Zwischenzug, he could just take back with a knight. So, and he would have won a piece. So there really is a threat there. So instead, I retreated my bishop so that it's not a target for that knight anymore. He centralized his rook onto the c file, which was good, and putting another defender on that sort of soft spot at c6. And then I attacked with my pawn, e4. And of course the threat is to take the knight. And if the knight moved, I was liking my position because I would probably, at some time soon, would consider playing e5, although possibly not after playing f3 first to shut him down along the diagonal. Although that could be a problem because this f3 square will be weak once this pawn moves. Nevertheless, I would have been happy to see the knight move out of the way, but he didn't do that. Instead, he made a Zwischenzug here to attack my queen, which of course was the computer's first choice as well. And my queen has to move somewhere. I chose a reasonable square to go to, d3. The computer also says c4 is a good square, but I didn't like that because of the pressure of the rook along that file, even though it's not an immediate threat. He continued then with knight to c7, and that surprised me. I expected him to actually to retreat the knight to e7 for some reason, and then maybe to come over to, to g6, so to go on a path like this over to his king side. Instead, he played knight c7, which the computer likes and is for good reason. It's a better move. And this is where I started to go astray. And now, I mean, at this point, I still have a very slight advantage, or a few tenths of a pawn at most. But I make several moves that are each below optimal and drift into a significantly worse position. None of them is really an outright blunder, but they're all sort of 3 or 4 tenths of a pawn mistakes each, and the sum total of them is serious. So in this position, after he played knight to c7, I was worried about his knight coming to e6 and threatening to come into, well, not the f4 square immediately, but putting pressure on the f4 square, but also threatening to come to d4, which would be a good post for the knight. For some reason, so I decided to prevent that. And the way that I prevented it was with queen d6. And now if the knight should come to e6, then this pawn simply hangs here. And I think white is, white's doing okay. It's, interestingly enough, it looks like black gets the pawn back. I was thinking that black had compensation for the lost pawn, but after knight c5, there's a triple attack here on the e-pawn, and my queen has to move. Once my queen moves, he'll be able to win the e-pawn back. So that's why it's still staying about equal. Instead of doing that, though, he had a stronger move, and it was one of those situations where after I made my move queen to d6, I almost immediately saw what his response would be. And, if you could take back your move in chess, I would have taken mine back at that point. And of course, what the response is to play knight b5. And that has the same threat of coming into d4 with the knight, but this time he's doing it with tempo on my queen. And my queen really doesn't have a good square to go to. It turns out that the best square to go to was to go back to d3, just to admit my mistake, and go back to the square that it had been on, according to the computer. Instead, I compounded my error by trying to put the queen on a more active square. The problem is the even though the queen right now is giving me a second defense on the e-pawn, it's two, and there are these two attackers, the queen and the bishop both are attacking for black. The problem is he can, with his next move, just play knight to d4, which is where the knight wants to be anyway, and now my defenses of e4 are cut off, and I have a hard time defending it. Okay, so he did do that, and I looked at the position for quite a while and didn't like anything that I looked at. It just looked like a nasty situation. And so I decided at this point to go ahead and sack the exchange. So for example, the computer is saying it's already, 1.3 pawns in black's favor, 1.4. And it's calling for the exchange sack as well. If instead I had played pawn to f3 here to defend this pawn, now he has a simple fork and he's picking up the exchange anyway. So that doesn't work, and there's no other way in this position. I'll turn off the engine here. So it doesn't distract us, and so the engine whine doesn't, fan doesn't make too much loud noise that's distracting either. So given that he's threatening the fork here on e2, and that there's really no other good way to defend this pawn, I could try maneuvering my queen, but that would just end me up in more hot water. I went ahead and sacrificed the exchange with rook takes knight, pawn takes, and then I compounded my error by playing queen takes pawn. And the problem with that is, I mean, the good thing about it, or at least what I thought the good thing about it was that it was giving me at least a pawn plus a minor piece for my rook. It turns out that I'm going to have a hard time holding on to that extra pawn, and it really just keeps black's initiative alive at this point. And instead of recapturing the pawn, so a better line would have been to just go ahead and defend the pawn at this point, and to go ahead and accept the weakness along this diagonal, and the fact that he has a pawn, he can protect this pawn now with moving one of his rooks to d8, and he has a protected passed pawn, but at least his initiative has been blunted for a while. Instead, the way I played it, to retake with the queen, now he's still going to win the e-pawn, and my queen will be an object of attack. So let's turn off the engine here. Okay, and so simply he just simply attacks me with his rook that was on the c file, right? So it was on c8. He plays rook to d8, attacks my queen, and my queen has got to go somewhere, and he still has now 3 attacks on this pawn. With the rook, the bishop, and the queen, I only have it defended instantaneously now here twice, so even if I move my queen to somewhere where it still defends it, I only have 2 defenders. So it's lost. There's no hope for it. And so I just go ahead and retreat my queen to c3. So he goes ahead and takes that pawn, and I make one last really poor move, although it's at this point White's game is getting pretty dire, and I go ahead and try to blunt his bishop. I should have just moved my bishop off that diagonal, like bishop to f1 or to h3, something of that sort, or to exchange bishops perhaps would be best. That's what Stockfish wanted to have me do at this point. Although, as I said in the notes, it actually ends up evaluating to minus 2.7, so it's really not a very good line. If I take the bishop, the queen takes back. I mean, he's just dominating the position, and he's up the exchange. A full 2 points there, plus has the initiative. And if I can come up and attack with my queen, but he can move his queen and defend that pawn, and now everything is defended pretty well for black, and he's just up that full pawn. It's an ugly position, so black really has a winning advantage at this point. Instead, after f3, he's just going to end up winning that pawn because the queen gets attacked yet another time, and now that f pawn is attacked twice, and I'm hard pressed to hold it. I went to d2. The problem is if he's also attacking, of course, the rook here through my queen, and so I have to move the queen somewhere where the rook is defended. When the only two places I can do that are e3 or d2, and either way he'll trade off the rooks, and which will just remove the defender, make my queen move, and so my queen was overworked here trying to defend this rook and the pawn at the same time, which you can't do both of. So that's exactly how it played out. I went to d2, he traded off the rooks, and then took the f pawn, and now the game's just totally lost. If we look at the analysis, we're up to minus 3.8 and climbing. It's almost up to 4 pawns. There's just no way to hold the game after this. I played the bishop to h3. I could have forestalled the inevitable a little bit by going to f1, but h3. The reason I did that was that it would keep his rook from immediately coming to c8, attacking my queen. But that's only one of the good moves at his option. And what he did do instead was computer's first choice again, as he did in many of his moves in this game. Came to e4, and that, of course, puts a double attack now on my bishop on e1. I either have to defend it or move my king. I defend it or move the bishop, and neither one works out well. What I did was to move the bishop to the diagonal that's weak, and he now brought his rook to d8. He's threatening to come down with a devastating check on my first rank, and which would lead to checkmate in a couple of moves. I went ahead and blocked with the bishop, so at least it wouldn't be check. But then, hoping that maybe I could entice him into making a mistake. So if he would play at this point now, rook down, attacking my queen and pinning the bishop, of course that would be a terrible blunder on his part because he's got to wait back rank, and I would checkmate him after a few moves here because he can't put up a successful defense on the 8th rank. Of course he didn't do that, and after I played bishop to f1, he took time out to make luft for the king right here on h7 with h5, and I threw in the towel at this point and resigned. So, very nice game by Ralph. It was one of those games that just slipped away from me by, we had the tension in the center, and I just sort of lost the thread of it. Somewhere in around the middle game here, and the kind of moves 18 to 22, where I was a little bit of a loss to figure out exactly how to go ahead and push forcefully. And I think this is just one of those positions where I needed to maneuver more quietly instead of trying to follow a forceful continuation, because trying to force matters just got me overextended, and his pieces have enough open lines, his rooks and bishop and so on, that my queen can come under easy attack, and that my initiative really bounced back on me. So that happens, and I'll be back to try again this week and see if I can put together a little better effort for your enjoyment. And meanwhile, Ralph will get to go up, I think, onto board 2 or board 1 and play Ray Paulson. And so, for this week, this is Roger Capello saying goodbye from my week at the club, and talk to you next week.